And
Yeah.
so the first thing is, put yourself out there, be transparent, yearn for community.
Mm.
Sometimes I think we as ministers, we have this complex of trying to do things, to accomplish things. And, if we are not, aware, be trying to do stuff on our own strength. Whereas in community, which leads me to my next big point as far as what I've learned, community and desiring the opinions, of others actually breeds creativity, which is the second thing I've learned. God gives us, creative wisdom. Of course, He spoke the world into existence, and that's a creative act. And as image bearers in Imago Dei, we can create on a low level, but we can still
Sure.
create.
Hey everyone, welcome to Faith in the Fold, the podcast for ministry, biblical studies, and Christian living. I'm your host, Kevin Burr. Today I interviewed my friend Robby John, youth minister for the Bay Area Church of Christ in Tampa, Florida. Robby and I first met at Harding School of Theology in Memphis, Tennessee, and since then we've had several opportunities to reconnect. I asked Robby to share with me one or two lessons he's learned in ministry, and what are a few resources he consistently uses to keep himself fresh. Robby stressed the importance of having mentoring figures in life and ministry, and he also emphasized the value of community for developing creativity. I know Robby will encourage you and give you some great resources for your own growth. If you enjoy the kinds of conversations we're having here on the podcast, would you be willing to like and subscribe to us, and maybe share us with someone you think might benefit from this? And as always, thank you so much for tuning in today.
Well, Robby, thank you so much, brother, for joining us today. I'm excited to be able to talk with you a little about your time in ministry and maybe maybe have you impart some words of wisdom to us here. But before we get into our first question today, let me ask you, tell us a little bit about how long you've been in ministry and what you're doing these days.
Oh man. So post island life, meaning being in the United States, I've probably been in ministry for over 13 years.
Mhm.
And I'm currently located in sunny Tampa, Florida. I'm actually a youth minister for the Bay Area Church of Christ in
Mhm.
Tampa, Florida. Been here, this is my 7th year. So I'm not an OG yet, but I'm working on it and enjoying being in youth ministry. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Now you mentioned island life. For those who don't know you, what particular island is that from? I bet some people would try to guess, but I'm confident they would guess incorrectly based on your accent.
Yeah, I think most people default to Jamaica, which is I just want to say it's not an insult to me, but every person from the Caribbean is not from Jamaica.
Right. There's
So
other islands besides Jamaica.
there's
Right.
hundreds of other islands.
Yeah.
So don't be that guy or that girl,
Mhm.
coming up as you don't know your geography. Everyone with an accent is not from Jamaica.
Uh-huh.
But I'm actually from Dominica, which is called the nature island of the Caribbean.
Mhm.
We actually have 365 rivers, if you can believe it or not.
Oh, wow.
So I like to think that I'm from the best island in the Caribbean, which everybody I guess thinks of.
Sure. Yeah.
But
Well,
let's
I'm
go.
from the best state of the U.S. So, and you can see my state flag behind me. I'll just, I'll let everybody else look it up if they don't know what the TriStar is.
I'm not gonna comment on that. I'm just gonna let you walk in that territory by yourself.
I know where I am too, and I'm brave enough to say it.
All right, well, the bravery is needed for your statement, so go ahead.
All right.
So yeah, so I grew up there. I meandered to Trinidad as far as preaching school is concerned, and then I
Mhm.
found my way to Harding for undergrad. I did an M.Min there as well, right after.
Mhm.
And of course, Harding School of Theology, went there also for my MDiv. So I guess I'm an orphan now because I found my way to ACU. So um, yeah, we'll see.
Nobody's perfect, Robbie. No, you're telling me just briefly about kind of what are you going to be doing or what are you going to be doing at ACU?
I'll be doing a doctor in ministry there. Shout out to Dr. Carson Reed,
Yeah.
Randy Harris, all these guys down there.
Yeah. I had the good fortune of growing up listening to Randy Harris preach when he was working at Lipscomb. He worked at the Donaldson Church of Christ, where you before we started recording, you had mentioned preaching minister who works with me, Mark Adams. He and I both grew up at that same congregation, so it's fun. Whenever we run into Randy, I'm always like, "Hey, do you remember me? I was a 5-year-old when you started."
Yeah, even with all 5 years wherever he's been, right?
So, exactly. Yeah, he's kind enough to say that he does remember me, but we've connected since then. I ran into him. I think he was alumnus of the year at HST one time when we were there, and we ran over to the I was at the Dixon, gardens down the street from campus there, just off of was it Park Avenue or something? So anyway. So, Robby, you've been in ministry long enough to where I think you've got some good stuff to share with us today. In your 13 plus years of ministry, plus having grown up in church and being around in those kinds of environments, what's one or two lessons that you've learned that you'd be willing to share kind of with us today?
Well, for me, I think the two biggest things, number one, is community. I think oftentimes, because we engage in different aspects of ministry, say youth ministry or family ministry or kids ministry. Sometimes we tend to be and work siloed because we have our thing going and we have our space in the church. But I think for me personally, through mentorship, I learned that you need community, that even in not just lesson planning, but even in how you flesh out ministry within your church, that you should really be cognizant of partnerships and involving everyone. And so for me personally, I like to think of ministry, youth ministry, as an extension of children's ministry filtering into like college or adult ministry. And so the first thing is, put yourself out there, be transparent, yearn for community. Sometimes I think we as ministers, we have this complex of trying to do things, to accomplish things. And, if we are not, aware, we could, be trying to do stuff on our own strength. Whereas in community, which leads me to my next big point as far as what I've learned, community and desiring the opinions of others actually breeds creativity, which is the second thing I've learned. God gives us creative wisdom. Of course, he spoke the world into existence, that's a creative act. And as image bearers in Imago Dei, we can create on a low level, but we can still create. And so, just to think about it blows my mind that God has given us ways and means of bringing forth the age-old conversation and message into our new modern realities. So, two biggest things: you're in for community, build a community, and also be open to be creative. Don't just get sold on one or two ideas. Read voraciously. Just learn and open your spirit up to being creative. Don't get stuck in being one-dimensional.
Right. Yeah. Robby, so what's funny is, as I could just tell, and I just got done recording. The episodes will debut at different times, but I just got done recording with our mutual friend, Steve Maxwell from North Atlanta. And basically the one piece of advice that he would give young ministers was kind of a progression of steps that would help them grow in relationships, or basically help them kind of create a community, and get to know their community within their context. I was telling him that I think almost everybody I've talked with, whether it's guys who've been doing ministry for 40 something years, like Jim Martin, who I interviewed a few weeks ago, and guys who are relatively newer in ministry, like Matt Love. You'd mentioned him before we started recording. He's been ministering somewhere in the neighborhood of, I think, 10 years over there at BB Arkansas. all of them have mentioned, everybody in between there has mentioned the importance of community and the importance of relationships. What I haven't heard, though, is this other aspect to that, where one of the benefits of community is the ability to grow in creativity.
Yeah.
That's an interesting piece. What is it about creativity that strikes you as something worth mentioning today? Why bring up creativity here?
Well, so when the pandemic, hit initially, I think for everyone, it sort of put us in the doldrum in terms of, activities. We couldn't go forward. We couldn't do anything. And so we were just here. And knowing that we still have to serve our churches, with the aspect of, media and Zoom and all those things. There was a medium that was there for many churches and many ministers untested because they were accustomed of doing ministry in terms of location, people driving to the churches and stuff like that. And so what I found personally was that when we as staff got together, and namely myself and even our children's minister, when we got together in the office to brainstorm and dream and think about how we could use this medium of the internet, Zoom, Facebook Live, and all those things, to still minister. We started to brainstorm, and her ideas, fed mine, and so on and so forth, to the point that we were able to come up with something that was palatable, for our church, for our ministries that we oversee. And so creativity cannot happen in an abstract environment. Yeah. Matter of fact, the creativity actually allows us to act upon, our environment in terms of, not just the physical environment, but human resources, and the people that we exist with. And so, dude, on one level, it was the worst of times because COVID-19, everybody's at home. But on the next level, it was the best of times because I got to see personally, and explore this idea of creativity that with the Spirit of God, even when things change in society, we can still thrive. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so before COVID, I love to be creative, but I wasn't thinking on that level. During COVID, even post-COVID, well, not post-COVID because we're still going on in that phase, but I just saw the benefit, of dreaming and saying, well, hey, the world has changed. So how do we keep the same age-old gospel, not to change the gospel, but to change the ways that we deliver it, we express it, to our environment, our community.
Yeah.
And, when we ask that question and when we brainstorm together, thinking out loud, so many things came out that we were just having a field day, picking out things. Everything did not work, of course.
Sure.
But the intent, in terms of, trying, allowed us to even learn from our failures to the point that, even in failure, we were actually growing and learning, which is mind blowing. So,
yeah. Some of the things that I saw a lot of churches have to do was actually take advantage of things that they maybe had attempted somewhat in the past and eventually grew in. Here's a good example from the church that I worked at in Kentucky. We had, prior to the pandemic, we had done a very little bit with Facebook Live. Just whatever guy had the newest cell phone with the best camera, we just set up his camera there. For our church of about 90 folks, we just set up his phone there with Facebook Live and just kind of make sure that it was pointed, roughly at our podium. I got back on the other day, check out their YouTube channel because I'm subscribed to them. I'd seen some of their stuff come up, and they've got a much different setup these days. It's like, man, guys, you had to wait till I left to get this set up. But it's really, but it's really great that they've got this really nice setup that's going to serve them well, because that congregation, it had a lot of folks who had justifiable reason to stay stay kind of cooped up and, to stay away from folks, because this time last year, we were still trying to figure out, how all this is being transmitted, masks or no masks, all that kind of stuff. It was still pretty fresh for a lot of us to figure out. And so a lot of folks were genuinely scared. But now that we kind of know a little bit more about it, we've still been able to, I think we've been able to find ways to improve upon the initial attempts that we tried. And you mentioned just a second ago, not everything worked. What were some of the things that y'all tried that did work? Were there some things like Facebook Live or YouTube or podcast or interviewing folks?
Yeah.
What worked for y'all?
I think for us, our biggest thing was maybe the Zoom classes. And I'll give you an example, even in particular for youth classes. So we actually joined with one of our sister churches about half an hour away. Shout out to George Welty. George preaches for that church, Northwest St. Peter's of Christ. And the youth minister, Casey Stringer. I think Casey is from Georgia.
Okay.
So with all youth groups, we combined, and so it just made our community grow. A lot of these kids went to camp with each other, and so it was like, hey, wow, this one is on that tile, this tile. It was like a Brady Bunch. Everybody's like happy to be here.
Yeah.
And so we just changed up the format. Instead of just giving like this is regular Bible class, we were doing High Low Buffalo, which if you don't know what that is, we can probably come back to that. It's a game.
Okay.
Just telling you how your day was and stuff like that. Highs and lows and a buffalo, of course. But and then we would have games that you saw on TV, but we retrofitted to the Zoom format. There was a time where we brought in speakers, to do different things. There was a guy I went to school with, Paul Kreitz. He's a missionary down in Guatemala. He runs an orphanage there. We were able to bring him in, Zoom him in and have a class, on what COVID is like in Guatemala. I mean, there was no boundaries to how we could do ministry. And we explored everything. We did everything. We had a virtual camp. We couldn't go to camp like we usually do every summer. So we had a virtual camp where we had speakers from New York. We had B. Chris, shout out to B. Chris Simpson.
Yeah.
Came and spoke for us.
He came up at the end of my episode with Steve. I'm gonna do it again. I've texted B. Chris, hadn't heard back from him about being on the podcast. So if you and Steve both will say, hey man, Kevin's trying to get you. maybe he'll listen.
I sent him an email today. Actually, I texted him today when we're done in this call. So
okay, cool, good.
But man, just everything just blew open, and to me, I felt like, this is the unstoppable kingdom of God driving forward, because like people are saying, well, the church is closed, and the church never closed.
Right.
If you know what you are part of, even with a pandemic, the church cannot be closed. And even with these ideas of church closed, church open, I started to read a book by I think Rodney Starks called the Rise of Christianity, and just to kind of see, even during times of pandemic, Christians were the first ones to go to those places to minister to those people. And now, hundreds of years later, we are saying we are hunkering down for everybody else, but we are the church. We needed to stand up and rise and lead people through this.
Yeah.
And so it was really, really good to see, as youth ministers and as people given spiritual charge over young people, to have them create a new vision, a new definition for what church is, and what you can do with the Spirit of God. So
I have heard for years sermons that say basically the church is not the building, it's the people, right? And we finally had an opportunity to really put that into practice, to basically to call our bluff, right? To see, okay, do you believe this? And I think most folks finally came around to saying, we know it's not just the building, but it probably took some people a long time to realize, like, oh yeah, maybe I can still be an effective minister, whether you're paid on staff or not. I can still minister effectively outside of those walls, beyond that location.
I mean, It's interesting that you say that, because I think a lot of churches, did suffer because they had the theory down, but they never really believed it. And when the practicality came up,
Mhm.
they just never showed. I mean, there are evangelical churches who actually did great. There are some people who actually grew during COVID
Yeah. Yeah.
because of the creative license that they took.
Mhm.
So I think for our churches as well, I think some people did well, but for a lot of people, they just went away. They couldn't take a step forward because they did not know how to. And I think it just begs the question: hey, yes, we preach the gospel, but as time changes, we cannot just do the very same things in the very same ways. We have to innovate, so to speak,
Yeah.
to be able to reach people and walk people through those times. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I heard you say earlier too that we're not changing the gospel. We're not innovating on the message, but
Yeah.
the presentation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Jesus didn't need iMovie or Final Cut Pro. He didn't have fancy microphones or Zoom,
Yeah.
but he had connection.
Mm-hmm. He
He
had
had
story. He
connection.
used story.
Exactly.
The big thing in that time, and people connected to it because that was part of the cultural fabric. So
Yeah. Yeah. Robby, I like that perspective, man. I like that perspective, especially this notion too. Um, to go back to something that we had mentioned earlier, this notion that creativity does not exist in a vacuum.
mm,
Kind of knitting yourselves together with other folks who are like-minded,
mhm.
specifically Christ like-minded, and are driving all of you towards God-defined good, right?
Yeah.
Like being truly knitted with people who want what is truly as God would define good. All of that really, really kind of creates conditions for flourishing,
Yeah.
or human flourishing, that I think are just not possible outside of the work of Jesus and the power of the Holy Spirit.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that in the midst of this kind of suffering that we saw last year, we were also able to see more clearly, maybe a juxtaposition of kind of the heights that the church could reach
Mhm.
were they continuing to step out in faith
Yeah.
in the midst of all these deep lows. Are you a switch? I know you're a music guy. Are you a Switchfoot fan?
Yes, I am. I am. I am.
Okay,
Actually, it was to another Switchfoot when I was at Harding, actually.
cool. Yeah. Okay.
Um, yeah.
So they've got a song that I've loved ever since I was at Harding. Um, the song title is "The Shadow Proves the Sunshine."
The shadow of the sunshine.
So, like, how do you know that there is? How do you know that there's light and goodness in the world? Well, you can see it by comparison with the darkness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's only shadows when something is blocking the light.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the fact that there is a shadow tells us that there is something greater, higher, better that is contrasting with that. That song has stuck with me ever since I heard it. And I think last year we were able to see kind of how that really plays out. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned the aspect of faith that, if you didn't step out on faith, you wouldn't have realized that. You wouldn't have even experienced that. And it's sad when your churches, actually closed. Actually, there was a few clicks from where I'm at who actually did close
Yeah.
because, they had low numbers to begin with. And then when COVID hit, they could not, you know, adjust. So, you know,
Yeah.
that doesn't speak well concerning people who are infused with the Spirit of God. I think,
Mhm.
we need to do much better. And I'm not asking for the impossible, but God is the God of the impossible.
Sure.
So,
Yeah. 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 I'm reminded of somebody who said something that, all things are possible with God. Somebody said that, I think. Right. Part of this community that you've just talked about knitting yourself with, it surely involves folks that you would consider peers,
Mhm.
folks that are kind of in the trenches with you,
Yeah.
have been doing it about the same amount of time as you. What about folks that you would consider mentor figures?
Yeah.
Who are maybe a couple of those?
Yeah.
What
There's
is it about
actually
a mentoring relationship that has helped you grow?
for one thing, um, uh, life has observatory moments that
Mhm.
help build your character and perspective. Because there are a lot of angles to life, and as you live, you're only privy to your angle. And so, for me
Mhm.
personally, there's another minister that I meet with every month. We have lunch. He's the lead minister for a church about half an hour from where I'm from, and you know, he's in a different context as far as different ministry and all that. But we are almost the same age, and
Mhm.
so I try to bounce ideas off of him, and we try to talk through situations and scenarios. I try to have like two or three guys that I kind of talk to on a weekly basis, um, just because it's more manageable. And whenever you're dealing with yourself, your spirit, your spiritual transformation, you have to deal with people that you could trust and who would trust you.
Yeah.
So with him, he reminded me, of the aspect of family. Basically, that yes, you're trying to innovate and do different things for the church, but remember your family, remember home life, and those relational ecosystems that you're a part of. That needs your input and your direction. So for me, listening to the voices of others, um, there are mentors who I hold dear that we don't they don't even know that they're my mentors because I'm
Mhm.
actually just observing them, observing maybe like their podcast or the YouTube channel, and learning concerning their flavor of life and their experiences.
Yeah.
This is not just religious. I think people tend to think that you only learn stuff about spirituality in church. Whereas every human being that is seeks to live a conscious life, you can learn from them. So for me to round up as far as mentorship, there's a few guys within the church realm that I meet with every month to talk through things, ask their opinions on things. Um, because sometimes you can think that you're the encyclopedia, the Britannica for all information ministry wise.
Yeah.
And it's not just the case. You have to have different aspects, different perspectives, so that you could be more aware of your surroundings and how to navigate, how to treat people, how to deal with people, how to manage personalities and all that stuff. And in a general way, there are some podcasts that I follow and people that I follow on YouTube and stuff to kind of look at how they do live, and I learn from that as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I like how you've got a variety of sources that you draw from. Um, and especially too, like picking a handful of folks that you just kind of watch
yeah,
and follow through. I was listening actually to somebody that I would consider probably something of a mentor figure, but yeah, I've never met this person in real life.
yeah,
I've got some of their books. I've listened to some of their podcasts. My friends and I talk about some of the things that this person has written before.
hmm,
And he had mentioned in something that he had released a couple of weeks ago about how our ideals are really in some ways kind of like a judge, because an ideal is a goal or something that you aim towards,
hmm,
and so you can consistently assess your efforts or assess your growth, your trajectory based on this ideal. And that really struck with me, that really stuck with me, because it I mean, Jesus, right? In that way also you can think of Jesus as someone who is an ideal but then also judge,
yeah,
because he is the person to whom I am constantly aiming my trajectory.
hmm,
He- it's just funny that you mentioned that, because I feel like I've seen that true in my own life. I wouldn't have called this YouTube personality a mentor,
yeah.
but they are in a sense, I guess, based on how you've kind of described that.
I mean, if you if
Yeah, go
you
ahead.
going for a conventional definition for mentor, I mean, I think that is included as well. I mean, it does necessitate that, you have to have a personal relationship to learn from somebody. So yeah.
True. Yeah, very true. Have you yourself been able to do any mentoring with folks who are kind of coming up through ministry or in your youth ministry that you would kind of view yourself as, particularly like I'm particularly in this kind of relationship with this person?
Yeah. There's a couple of students who've actually really uh, needed and wanted that type of relationship. So whenever the COVID-19 thing started, we spent more time together in terms of even just calling and dialoguing. There was a few who wanted to figure out life after COVID. So we were talking about internships and different things. But yeah, there's a few that actually reached out, which is if you figure how kids are sometimes, they might not be so transparent in asking for help. But it was good to see that we had that relationship that we had cultivated over the years to where they could be vulnerable and actually had something to teach. Usually, even with the format we did as far as youth ministry, our Wednesday night format, the joint Zoom sessions, I think it gave me a chance as well for them to see, the other youth minister and the other kids, to learn from that setting as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I had I've mentioned this in some earlier episode on the podcast. I think it was around 2016 where a student who had been in the youth group where I had interned for a couple of summers back in 2011 and 2012. He called me up one day. It's like, hey, Kevin, I was talking about mentors with my friends. He was an undergraduate student at Lipscomb at the time. I've been talking about, mentors with my friends, and we all kind of thought that it would be good for us to have somebody that we kind of officially recognized, sort of formally recognized as our mentor. And I was wondering if you'd be willing to do that. It's like, actually, yes. The reason why I said yes so quickly is because I'm an awesome person. Okay. No.
Where's the button for the boo?
Yeah. Yeah. No, the reason why I said yes so quickly was actually the opposite. It wasn't because I was so awesome. It was because literally just days before that, I had been complaining to my wife. I really felt like I have missed out on some opportunity. I think that I could grow more if I had somebody that, they and I both formally recognized our interaction as a mentor-mentee type relationship. If I could find somebody, here I was complaining, although I never actually reached out to anybody to say that. Like this young man who actually had the guts to step out and say, hey, Kevin, would you be willing to do this? I just never did that.
Yeah.
And so it was funny to hear just days after that conversation, God kind of saying, okay, yeah. Are you willing to give what you want to receive?
Yeah.
Because that was basically the question. Like, are you willing to give what you would want to receive? And, in the course of that time for the last 4 or 5 years now, he and I have both grown a lot.
Yeah.
In that role. It's interesting how I think that's something that's so very necessary, but I hear less about it these days than maybe I have in the past. Folks that you and I would look at, I mean, we overlapped quite a bit there in Memphis. When did you start HST?
HST, I think I started in 2010, I think.
Oh, okay. So that's when I started. Yeah. So we started at the same time. I just remember hearing guys like Alan Black and I think Rick Oster, a lot of folks like that. I remember and Everett Hufford as well. I remember hearing them talk about, such and so, so and so was kind of a mentor figure, or all like that. And I remember thinking, have I missed out on something? I don't think like I've got that. I really feel like I should use it though if I want to be like these guys that I'm taking classes with.
Yeah.
So that's I spend a lot of time talking about that because I think that that's incredibly valuable, and have only recently come to see the necessity of that.
I mean, I think maybe in your life it was always there, but maybe in a very non-traditional way.
Maybe.
I mean, the reason why the guy called you at first to say, "Hey, could you be my mentor?" is because maybe he saw something that you were doing, as far as how you live your life. And so the power of witness, I think, sometimes we downplay.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people are watching how we live our lives. And for me, I had to learn that specifically during the beginnings of COVID-19, because, at first, a lot of the kids just wouldn't show up to class, even now. And so I took that personal. There were times when I was frustrated, when, I bore it all, so to speak. And, I promised myself that whenever I would come to class, even if there was like 2 or 3 kids on there, or 15 kids, I would keep the same energy level.
Yeah.
And I think because of that, I don't know what's gonna, how a kid is being formed internally, in terms of, how they see Christianity and how Christianity affects people and their emotions. So maybe in 5 years, 10 years, they might have this picture of what I try to do that could help them in some way or somehow. But you never know. People are always watching, and so our first job is to be faithful, do the next faithful thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what you did, which is why the guy said, "Hey, I might just call up Kevin and see if you want to be my mentor."
Yeah.
So.
Hopefully, I like what you said there, though. Our, despite who's watching, our next job is to do the faithful thing. Yeah, that's good, Robby. I like that.
I borrowed it, but I don't know who I borrowed it from, so that's fine.
Oh, okay. We'll quote you here. Yeah, we'll quote you here. In addition to these mentoring relationships that have helped you grow and kind of help you, be sharpened, I'm reminded of the proverb, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. In addition to those kinds of relationships, are there particular resources or other practices that you have or that have developed over the years that kind of help you grow and stay fresh? Something that you might be able to share, maybe a couple of things with us about this.
Sure. I love Seedbed. So Seedbed is actually a YouTube channel that's I think run by your university, your old.
Asbury Theological Seminary. They've got a lot of good stuff. Yeah.
I mean, I actually took a class at Asbury, the Orlando campus, for one of the subjects I had to fulfill for HST.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. But I think you'd mentioned that to me a long time ago. Yeah.
But Seedbed, man, is like, it's not elongated. It's really, a little more than short PP statements, but 5 minutes to maybe 18, 20 minutes, you could have a good wholesome discussion or things to chew on as far as topics, from Old Testament, New Testament, themes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I love to like delve into that, especially from a time constraint.
Mm-hmm.
I want to feel like I'm getting something and I'm in the process of staying ahead of the current conversations in theology.
Yeah.
And so that's been great for me.
For folks who might not have heard you clearly enough, the audio cut out just a second and it like sped back up. That the recording might be a little laggy. The audio recording might be fine, but that's Seedbed. Mm-hmm. Seedbed, like SEEDBED, Seedbed. Yeah. What was the next thing you were going to say?
Now, this is a little more sporadic, but on YouTube, there's everything that NT Wright has put out in terms of the pandemic and discussions and podcasts. I think there was one concerning the vaccine and that they did with a biochemist, I think. Mm-hmm. Some guy who wrote something about a book about the genes, about genes. I can't remember his name right now, but they had like a Zoom meeting, and then they played guitar together, singing.
Oh yeah, NT Wright was Francis Collins. Is that him?
Francis Collins. Yeah. And it was fascinating to see like how science, met religion in a way that they complement each other.
Yeah.
And so I'll do that from time to time. I also coach soccer. So whenever I'm making that drive, I'm listening to stuff from N.T. Wright or maybe like another scholar
Mhm.
on things that I'm interested in. Because I always want to be, growing spiritually, but also being able to understand, the lingo in terms of theological discourse that's, happening now.
Yeah.
And aside from that, man, I like books. I love to read. So
Weird. You're about to get a doctorate.
if you don't like to read, then you can't get a doctorate, right? So,
Yeah.
but for the past couple of months, I've been doing a lot of reading. I have a few recommendations, if I could. Um, uh, One of the guys that I like is John Mark Hicks. I started off during COVID with these two.
Mhm.
One, two.
And
Vision
for
for the
those who are
Black.
just listening, Robbie's got Searching for the Pattern by John Mark Hicks, and another book by John Mark Hicks called Women Serving God.
Yeah.
I've started Searching for the Pattern, and then I started a new job, and so I haven't been able to finish. I have Women Serving God, but also haven't been able to start that yet because I'm adjuncting and teaching 2 classes for church. So like,
Yeah, it's not like you don't have anything to do, right? So,
right. And I decided to start a podcast on top of that too. Yeah.
but I mean, as far as you're just church history and women in churches of Christ, I think, man, this is such a good resource as far as I guess they're both companions. You read one off of the other,
Mhm.
so they kind of go together.
Yeah.
Aside from that, as I mentioned, this is a pretty
I'll
good read.
before you get to that one, I'll throw in another word
Yeah.
word for John Mark Hicks. I occasionally run into him, occasionally, like at Christian Scholars Conference or something along those lines. But his online presence is where I know him the most because
Really?
that's where I see him and interact with him the most.
Yeah.
And he and I would come to some different conclusions on things, but I always feel like he respects people that he disagrees with.
Yeah.
He is one of the least, or he's never bombastic. He's never, he will argue, but he's never argumentative, if that makes sense. That's
sense.
something, that's a distinction that Bob Turner made at the time of recording earlier this week when I interviewed him. He and I talked about how to disagree without being a jerk. And I wonder, I asked Bob, he's like, Bob, did you pitch this idea to me because you have a lot of experience being a jerk? and he was gracious enough to play along for a little bit. But, Dr. Hicks will be happy to argue his position, but he'll never belittle you.
Yeah.
He will honor you as a person made in God's image. And, if there were one person that I, absolutely had to mirror myself, and how I treat others, even those with whom I disagree, John Mark Hicks would be at the top of that list. So that's my recommendation for him as a person. I haven't read all of his stuff. Okay. So like, that's not a wholehearted recommendation of what he says. Just him as a person, he's a good person to follow and take a look at. So,
I mean, even if in how he writes the last 2 pieces, he actually has a section where he brings in people from different backgrounds, women and men, to weigh in on what he wrote.
Yeah.
He's writing, but he's writing in community, which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it's good stuff. All right, there was another one too that you had that you're going to show.
Yeah. So this is recommended by N.T. Wright.
Okay.
The Rise of Christianity by Rodney Stark.
Okay.
Basically, if you want to have a perspective on how Christians should think and act during a pandemic, this is the go-to book. The Rise of
And that's Rodney Stark.
Yeah, Rodney Stark.
Any relation to Tony? Sorry.
I knew you would have gone there.
My apologies to Marvel fans everywhere.
Maybe just semantically, but that's it. That's about it. And the last 2, of course, I would recommend. I mean, these books are not super expensive, but I'm a book junkie. But
book junkie.
One is from Creech. This is Robert Creech. Family Systems and Congregational Life
by Robert Creech.
Yeah, if you're familiar with the Bowen system theory.
All right, this is apparently something I need to get on because in my interview with my preaching minister here, Mark Adams, he mentions that. Jim Martin, I think, mentioned something along those lines. Had somebody make a comment on that on one of the venues where I shared that video, and he referred to Bowen systems theory. My my time at Harding School of Theology, for my electives, it was all stuff like, advanced Hebrew exegesis and additional Greek language based seminars in the synoptics and stuff like that. I didn't expect that I would need to know how families and systems work. I might have missed something. I'm glad I did what I did, but it really seems like I might have missed something. And this is a good place to start, right?
Yeah, and there's still time, so you can actually redeem the time. All right. So,
I'm not totally lost yet.
you're not lost yet. You're good. You're good.
Yeah, and that's spelled Creech, Robert.
Yeah,
Creech.
Robert Creech. Robert Creech. Yeah.
Yeah. What is it about that one that you find valuable?
So basically, the systems are kind of a scientific approach to looking at relational ecosystems.
Mm-hmm.
But personally, in a congregation, it allows you to see, how people navigate relationships. How they triangle, how they assess, hurt and pains, how they internalize all that stuff, and it allows you to do it from the standpoint of understanding your own self and your own feelings, so that you could actually go into a situation or observe a situation, whether it's in your family or whether it's in the congregation, and be objective, where you don't take things personal, but you can see that what is going on is, I guess, a buildup of things from the past in terms of family systems, interactions, types of families that people bring to the table in their present relationships. And so I think for me, it allows me personally to be objective and to understand my triggers and the things that I need to work on, so that when I'm evaluating how I act with the kids, my wife, church folk, clergy, Simply Church of Christ with clergy, so I can recognize things, so that I could be able to be a mature actor in the situation as opposed to just a reactor. So
I like the differentiation, an actor rather than a reactor. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Tony Stark's reactor.
Oh, there it brought it back full circle. Man. I got it.
Man, that was good. That was pretty good. I like that.
I like that. Was there another one that you had to?
Yeah. So this one is by I think he works with the Fuller Youth Institute in California.
Okay.
His name is Scott Cormode, and he wrote this one called The Innovative Church.
The Innovative Church by Scott Cormode, not Commode.
Commode, not a
Cormode. CORMODE.
Commode, a commode.
Yeah, Cormode.
It's a different thing.
Yeah, different. Yeah.
So his thing is basically the world has changed, and we as Christians, we need to take the word of God and use it in a way that the world could recognize. So we have to adapt, not the word in terms of changing the message, but adapt how we make it disponible to people. So yeah.
Yeah. I saw something the other day that I thought was pretty interesting. I'm not going to try to give a ton of specifics, because I saw it for a grand total of maybe 30 seconds. There's just some graph that somebody gave where it's like, in terms of human development, the very first thing that we learned how to do was was speaking, right? Like we're speaking about our environments, realities, the families, things like that. And then at some point later on in the progression of time, we have the development of writing, and suddenly there's the new kinds of possibilities. It's sort of like a really kind of a paradigm shift for humanity when we started developing different systems for writing. The third big shift that came was broadcasting, because then we started just speaking and kind of talking, and then suddenly your message can be delivered beyond your physical reach, in terms of writing. Even beyond that, and even faster, is different forms of broadcasting, whether it started off with telegraph, and then eventually radio, and now worldwide streaming at an instant. It'll be interesting to see kind of what the next sort of shift is. But throughout all of those developments, there was a necessity for Christians to adapt not the message, but how they presented the message, which is exactly what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And before we had started recording, you had mentioned the Innovative Church to me, and so I think that might have been why you had mentioned some of that stuff earlier.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I do like that idea that, yes, if the world has changed irreversibly, then our presentation can change in some ways, provided we still do the kinds of things that we've always needed to do.
Yeah.
Deep relationships, community, that sort of thing.
Yeah. First things first. Like, keep first things first.
Yeah. Yeah. Robby, what are some practices? So in addition to reading, is there any other practices or things like that that you haven't mentioned yet, or something that you want to return to that you've used to kind of help you stay fresh in especially in a season like we've just experienced, where nothing is normal in a pandemic?
I think meditation. It's not transcendental meditation. Okay, so
right. I don't have enough candles to meditate like that.
With some Buddhist stones, but
right, yeah.
Because of the time, that we spent in seclusion when the virus thing just started to make its rounds, I spent a lot of time in my office, preparing lessons and getting my setup, for Zoom and all that.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't something that I carved out, as opposed to I ran into. But I became keenly aware of it. And I think for me, it translated into, even when I'm driving, instead of playing a lot of music and different things, I would actually just leave the radio off and just seek to kind of think through the day and what's coming next, and just maybe talk to God.
Yeah.
And so I'm not a guru for meditation. I don't have like years of practice. I think because of the pandemic, I was forced to seek Sabbath in that way. But it has been really cool to where right now, whenever I jump in the vehicle, automatically I'm like, okay, well, it's like I have a 20-minute commute. Let's just have a moment of silence, and it's refreshing. There is something about slowing down, not just your body but your spirit, and just being at ease. And you'd be surprised, thoughts of reflection that pop up, insights that come, and I'm like, it's not telekinesis or whatever, but I feel that the great spirit of God is communing with your spirit because you're seeking, and what's the promise of scripture? Seek and you shall find, ask and it will be given unto you, knock and the door will be open. So I know that's out of context for you people who are out there, New Testament people. But I think
you're getting me. No, I think that's a faithful application of the kind of thing, because when Jesus mentions those sorts of things, he's talking about the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you are seeking to be more fully brought into, more fully immersed, to use language that we're big fans of, more fully immersed into the kingdom.
Yeah. You're near, but you're just not in yet, so you gotta meditate.
I like how I really like that practice, actually. This is my wife will make fun of me for this kind of thing. Occasionally her friends will ask her, hey, have you, hey, next time you go on a trip or something like that, check out this podcast, or listen to these songs or stuff like that. And she'll say, well, we actually don't listen to a lot of music in the car because my husband likes to talk to me. But it's part of this drive that I feel to connect with others. And I mean, goodness, you mentioned earlier, the absolute importance of making sure that you are consistently experiencing a healthy family relationship. Too many ministers, folks that we know personally, too many ministers have maybe not done what they needed to do to safeguard either time with their family or safeguard their hearts, and have had some pretty tragic things happen, largely at their doing. But also, so like that's one thing, just kind of connection. But turning off the radio, turning off the music, and So it's fun. You described that as meditation. I almost don't think that as meditation. I would call that more reflection. But maybe if we just understand meditation slightly differently than kind of sitting on the floor, trying to empty out our mind, breathing in incense and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think I might be able to trim that out.
I think
We'll
the hour was up. So
the hour was up and somebody was calling you. Yeah.
my wife calling. I'm supposed to get my son here in about 20 minutes. So.
All right. Well, we've got a time frame then. No, but one practice that I've done that I think is pretty useful is to stop and think about what are the things that I struggle with today.
Mm-hmm.
Did I struggle with those same things a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when I was in high school, beyond that? That's been a really useful exercise for me because it helps me see kind of how I have grown. Hopefully I have grown. It also keeps me humble too, because if there are things that I'm still struggling with, if there's, sins or attitudes or things like that I'm still struggling with, that I've struggled with for 15 years, it's like, maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I haven't really made as much progress as I think I have. So, Robby, as we kind of near the end of our time together today, is there anything else, any kind of last point that you want to revisit or anything you want to bring back up that you want to kind of take us home with today?
I mean, as an island guy, I just want to say, keep everything airy, man. God got this.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, cool.
I appreciate you having me, man. I think this is needed, just for us to reflect on thoughts and just kind of encourage each other. So shout out to everyone who's doing this podcast with you and for the wealth of information, and wisdom that we're trying to share to help each other grow. So appreciate it.
Yeah. Robby, brother, glad to have you on, sir. Take care, okay?
All right, man. You stay blessed.
You too.